Farming is a risky business. So is the operative word in that sentence business or risky? According to Christian Hebert, de-risking farming comes down to the numbers. He says you used to be able to blame financial losses on the weather, but he says you can't do that anymore. He says, let's take a look at a 8,000 acre farm as an example. To him, that's one seeder, 2 combines, 1 sprayer, and 3 full-time workers plus the owner. And he said the cost to operate that farm runs at about $400 per acre, which means that a farmer needs to have access to about $3.2 million in cash and working capital that will cover the farm from January through to about harvest. He says then you need to add in another $350 an acre in capital investment. So that's another 2.4 to about $2.7 million, which adds up the total to about $5 to $6 million. Hebert says knowing exactly what the costs are allows farmers and their lenders to make informed decisions and run sophisticated enterprises. And he says you have to add in human resources. Hebert says having your finances in order makes it a whole lot easier to attract talented staff, which in turn improves the quality of your operation, and in doing so you improve your profitability. Central to risk management, he says, is the adoption of technology in farming. Hebert says we can collect data completely differently than we used to. Accurate weather, equipment, and people information provide farmers with the insights they need to produce budget projections and allow for unpredictable weather. Hebert says, I think through the use of proper risk management programs, you can get your variance to be a lot smaller on the downside and capture the upside potential by having great people, great data, and great tech. And lastly, and probably the most important, having proper reinvestment in the engine of your business. I invited Christian Hebert to join me for a Conversation That Matters, Food for Thought episode about the business of farming in Canada. Christian Hebert, thanks for joining me for this episode of Conversations That Matter, Food for Thought. One of the things that we look at when it comes to farming is this tremendous surge in innovation. But from your perspective, and I know that you embrace all of that, but you also are pushing forward this agenda that says we got to look at farming as a business and really understand what the numbers are and what they mean, why it matters to the farmer, and ultimately why it matters to the consumer. Why from your perspective, is it so important that we're able to do an accurate business analysis of every component of farming?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me on and appreciate the chance. And you're exactly right. I mean, I think fundamentally farm businesses have to be strong when it comes to people and financials. And if you can't have a strong financial business that has a good people component, then sustainability isn't even possible because you can't allocate resources on the proper items to be sustainable. So I do believe that the original building block is to ensure you know your numbers, your cost of production per acre, you know what you're spending on inputs versus machinery and people versus land in order to calculate your net profit and net margin. And then that allows you to do the reinvestment in all the pieces that both farmers and companies and consumers want.
So to somebody who isn't in farming and in another sort of business, you go, well, yeah, of course. Like, doesn't every business need to know that? But historically, that hasn't been the case in farming. How come?
Well, I think there's a couple points. So point one is the way taxes are filed in agriculture is on a cash basis, not on an accrual basis. So that causes a few calculations to be different, and farms tend to focus on their bank account more than the actual cost. Secondly, I mean, as farmers, we grew up growing crops. It's what we're passionate about is growing crops and producing food for the world, not necessarily the business side of farming. And for generations, it's worked really well to just work harder, not work smarter. In today's world, with the data and the technological revolution, as well as the consumer's ability to have access to that information, and they want access to it, it's really caused us to have to revamp our businesses to be very business focused. No different than I think every small business out there. It's part of the growing pain or hitting the ceiling, and that ceiling was, financial sustainability becoming a real important leg of the stool. Just in the past, as I said, due to the way the taxes are filed and due to the passions of people in agriculture, it hasn't always been a top priority until the banker or until the accountant made it a priority.
And that is a fundamental relationship, isn't it? The relationship now between the farmer and their lender, because the cost of equipment, the scale of farms, the value of the seed and fertilizer, and so on, you're really having to work in a pretty intimate relationship with your financing institutions.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we need to have great relationships with all of our advisors, the lender being one of the most important ones. And I think, I always kind of joke that the more you know your numbers, the more you feel your banker works for you. They end up being your vice president of finance versus if you don't know your numbers, you work for them, right? If you understand how your finances work and how the banking world works, you should be able to go into your banker and already understand that the loan's going to be approved and approximately one interest rate. You shouldn't have to go into them to say, hey, I want to spend $500,000 on a couple pieces of new equipment. Do you think I'm allowed to? So I think that's another thing in agriculture too that we need to work towards is much more of a partnership mentality with the companies we work with. One being the lending institution, versus I think we're a little bit guilty of always feeling like we're the customer of all those companies, and they need to treat us better. I think we got to work towards partnership mentality, which is what's a win-win for both sides of each negotiation, and we need to understand what causes them to like dealing with farms and not like dealing with farms, and the same side from us, and we can really move the industry forward more quickly than we have.
You talk about working in partnership with the financial institution rather than like coming, with open palms saying, please help me get through this. When you change the nature of that relationship, how does it change one's perspective as a farmer and their relationship with their own business? Do they make better decisions? Do they feel more confident? Are they more in control of potential outcomes?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the minute you move to a win-win type mentality and partnership type mentality, your future is full of opportunities because you have more people in your court on your team. Even though they're one of your suppliers or customers, it almost feels like you're working together. So, I mean, some examples is we do a 3-year financial projection, and I already know at our current pace of expansion that 3 years from now, my working capital, i.e., cash, is going to be lower than what the bank would like to see. So we've got a meeting booked for after this harvest to go through our 3-year plan so that we can be 2.5 years ahead of that issue versus them phoning me in 3 years and saying, hey, you're off covenant. We need to do something about this. So now all of a sudden I have, my banker and her boss literally working with me for the proper solution because we both feel it's the right decision to take on these expansions. And we work together to decipher the solution.
So when you uh, make those kinds of adjustments, you're helping to improve the profitability of running a farm. What's the difference in farmers' ability to be able to manage their farm, to maintain their equipment, and to care for the soil when they know for sure that there's going to be some prosperity?
I think it's like any business. Profits tend to be reinvested. If you're passionate about your business, profits are reinvested into the engine of those businesses. And the engine of a farm is one, the land, and two, the people. So, I mean, that's where profits get reinvested, especially farms aren't held on a stock market. There's no 90-day vision. I mean, I want my kids to be able to take it over. So I have a very long-term vision. So my profits are going to get reinvested back into my land, my people, and my equipment fleet. Land, I mean, land really works exactly the same way your personal finance budget does. What comes in needs to be bigger than what goes out from a financial perspective, but you need to replenish the things that depreciate. So if you figure out a bushel of wheat, there's an exact calculation on what the nutrients are that bushel of wheat removes from the land. So as long as profitability is there, that should get replenished or even, stockpiled or added a little bit if you plan on growing bigger yields. It's just math. However, you have to pay for fertilizer, you have to pay for seed. And so if you can't pay the bill, people tend to reduce the amount of inputs or seed that they use, which means it's a bad math equation and you trend downwards. It's like a backwards treadmill.
So you talk about calculating those costs. Are you able to calculate right down to the acre what it's going to cost you to plant for wheat or canola or whatever else that you're barley or whatever else that you're planting, can you get it literally right down within 10 cents an acre as to what your costs are? And for somebody who is outside of farming, what are the elements that start to go into that calculation? Like, what are the different components that you're figuring out?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, we can budget down. I always say it's kind of within $10 an acre, and that fundamental shift is usually tied to something we don't have a long-term contract on. For instance, if we don't have fuel hedge for the whole year, or how Mother Nature has affected our operation, we've had to do an extra pass of something. For sure, we can get within $10, and in most years we'd be sub $1 an acre. For example, we'll just use easy math. $400 an acre is approximately the cost to farm an acre in Saskatchewan. Obviously, it depends partly on where the donkey died, i.e., where you settled and the dirt you're on. But in that mix, the biggest category would be your inputs, which is seed, fertilizer, and chemical. They are, that plus water, sun, and dirt is what makes the equation of food. If you don't have those six things, it's really tough to grow a crop.
Right.
The second biggest pool, I'd call it, we call it labor, power, and machinery. So you could think of that as the cost of getting the job done. That's our equipment cost, our cost of people, our cost of fuel, our cost of repairs, our cost of electricity, everything you require to put that crop in and take that crop off. And then the last pool of costs is what we call land building and finance. And I mean, it can vary wildly from farm to farm. It's really a function of old and rich or young and poor, to tell you the truth, and then also management ability. But that's where we put the cost of land. So land rent or interest on land, property taxes, building expenses and repairs on buildings. That's the cost of being there. You have to have that just to be able to play the game. Where that labor, power, and machinery cost is more a function of how well do you play the game as a manager.
When you're talking $400 an acre, you can only amortize that out to $400 an acre when you have hundreds, if not more than 1,000 acres, as I understand it, because the individual costs on their own would be too expensive.
Exactly. So I mean, if you took a slightly used John Deere combine, kind of the S790, it's the biggest one they have out right now. That combine's worth close to $500,000. The depreciation alone on that combine will be somewhere around $60,000 a year. So if you're only going to combine 1,000 acres with that, your depreciation is really, really expensive, right? $60 an acre just for the combine. Where if you're going to combine 4,000 acres with that, you've now got that combine cost of ownership down to $15. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're very correct. There's a lot of work to be done around the right fit of your equipment and your people to your acre base, or the production that comes off those acres.
4,000 acres. Is that not an unusual size in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, maybe even parts of Alberta?
Yeah, I think in today's world, you'd call an average size farm in the prairie provinces between four, 4 and 5,000 acres. I think if you looked at the Canadian data, they probably say Saskatchewan average acres is 1,600 or so. But that, the way CRA deems a farmer, it's 10,000 gross dollars. So there's a lot of 30, 40 acre kind of hobby farms as part of it. But, 4 or 5,000 acres is a father and a son, probably 2, 3 generations old, and doing a great job, and has a living for two families. I'd call that a pretty normal farm in Western Canada.
Okay, but at $400 an acre times 4,000 acres, that's a lot of money every year. So the cash flow is extraordinary.
Yeah, and I mean, the $400 an acre is really what I just deem your operating costs. That's just your cost of doing business on an annual basis. That doesn't include, the amount of money you would have invested in your real estate business, i.e., owning land, and then the investment of dollars in your equipment. I mean, there's the operating cost of equipment, but there's the actual investment. So yeah, you're 100% right. The operating costs alone are about 400, and then the investment per acre in equipment is probably close to $350, depending on farms, and then depending on how much of your land you own, it's a separate business, but it's an extremely capital intensive business. I.e., why I said your relationship with your lender is pretty critical.
earlier on, you just sort of casually threw out the figure of like a $500,000 tractor. Well, that's a pretty significant piece of equipment, and that's not the only piece of equipment. So the cost of equipment is extraordinary.
I'll just do an example. So we're currently in a negotiation right now on an 8,000 acre expansion. And 8,000 acres is actually my favorite number for a farm size. It's one air seeder, two combines, one sprayer, about three full-time people plus the owner. It just works good from a metric standpoint. So with that 8,000 acres, I know to operate it is going to be around $400 an acre. So I need to have access to $3.2 million in cash just for the working capital to pay the bills prior to being able to sell the crop. So that kind of gets me from January till, the end of September when the crop's in the bin and I can actually sell something. I know that I need to allocate about $350 an acre into the capital investment. Some of it's going to be debt, some of it's going to equity, right? So, I mean, right there, you got 2.4 to 2.7 million dollars in order to get the capital lined up for it. So all of a sudden, an 8,000 acre expansion, you're talking $5 to $6 million that you need to plan for. And the funny thing is I'm pretty comfortable with numbers. So that part actually worries me less than I need to find 3 really good people to ensure that when I take on more acres, I farm my newest acre every bit as good as my first acre, right? Because there's no use. Lots of times you're trying to get a little bit larger to make all the costs work. But really, I find that getting larger allows you to have people do what they love more of the time. And then if people do what they love more of the time, they do a better job. So the key part of sometimes getting larger is in order to play the chess game of having great people doing what they love a lot of the time makes you more profitable, which makes you more sustainable. Easiest way to get the best productivity out of your team is allow them to do what they love and what they're good at the majority of the time. And if the smaller your acres, the more roundabout job description I say they have. Do what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it is kind of the joke. And so the people side that I think actually fundamentally drives the ability to use your cash to its best knowledge. And I think since we're talking about advancements in tech and data, that's really what's made us more comfortable on those types of expansions. We can collect data completely different than we used to when it comes to weather, when it comes to our equipment, when it comes to our people, that really allow us to dial in those budgets and our budgets to actuals and our assumptions, where before, honestly, Mother Nature was a good excuse because we didn't have sensors, et cetera, on the land, the weather, and the equipment the way we do now, and it really was extremely variable. Where in today's world, although the numbers are significantly bigger, I think you can get your variance to be a lot smaller by proper utilizing risk management programs on the downside risk and capturing the upside potential by having great people and great data and great tech. And lastly, probably the most important, having proper reinvestment in the engine of your business, which, as I mentioned, is mainly the land.
Okay, but you talk about people, the right people who are doing work that they are passionate about. Uh, for the last 50 or 60 years, in great numbers, there's been this move away from farming. There's been a move away from farming for the last 300 or 400 years since what was considered to be modern agricultural practices going back to the 1700s. So that raises the question, how do you find those people?
You want me to talk about my farm or the industry?
Well, both, because I know that you also have, in essence, created an agency to help locate people and put them in touch with the right job.
And so I think as an industry, we've done a poor job of explaining the benefits of working on a farm. So the one thing I think we've done a poor job is that you can work on a farm as a career. There literally is, I mean, we have levels of operator, 1, 2, 3, then you move into our management zone. It's more like a welding or an electrician or a plumber program than the majority of the world assumes. I think the majority of the world assumes that you're a farm hired man or hired woman, and that's your job for the rest of your life. And so we haven't portrayed that very well as an industry. The second thing is I think as an industry, we've in general paid pretty poorly. Like they can get a similar type job with a similar type skill set for $2 to $3 an hour more with benefits and pension. So I mean, on our farm, I guess that's some of the stuff we've tried to tackle. We try to have real clarity around your role and your ability to grow. We really rally people around the fact that we're a growth orientated business. We enjoy growing, and can't isn't a challenge. It's just, or isn't a can't isn't an option. It's just a challenge. We're going to find ways to get over everything. and we rally people around our values. We talk about it in public speaking events, etc. But then the clarity around the role, transparency around wages and how we fit into the market, but also we have benefits, we have pension, we pay overtime in our busy seasons. And we try to portray the benefits. Like, other than seeding and harvest, if you need a couple hours off to go to a kid's soccer game or a doctor's appointment, you can get that from us. It's not a problem.
Mhm.
You give us a week or two's notice and you can get the vacation you want. And so some of those benefits that you can't get in other jobs, I think we've done a bad job of really explaining to the rest of the world.
Do you know Robert's sake? He talked about people have this vision of sort of round fendered trucks and the farmer wearing the bibbed overalls. And he goes, that's not the world of farming any longer. But that's the image that so many of us have of farming. How do we then start to share the message that that's not the farming of today, and it most certainly isn't the farming of the future, where we have to produce significantly more food?
Yeah, I think, once again, I think it's partly an industry problem. So, I mean, we all know that when you do the surveys, etc., farmers are ranked really high on trust and morals and ethics, right? And because of that, for some reason, we want to hang on to this wheat hanging out of our mouth, plaid shirt and overalls, right? And to be honest, it kind of pisses me off. So we want people to trust us, but the image we're going to portray isn't who we are anymore. I mean, if you're in my office right now, I got two computer screens, I got a microphone that's worth 400 and some dollars so I can do an interview with you and with other people. I got an iPad in my truck at all times, and my air seeder has 7 screens in it, right? I can log into any piece of my equipment from anywhere in the world and tell you where it's drove in the last 24 hours, what it's applied to the ground, and what the output is when it comes to fuel and people. And so I almost think we need to retell our story. Yes, we're trustworthy. The reason we're trustworthy is that I got a 6 and 8-year-old kid that my goal is to send them to Harvard, give them the opportunity to go to Harvard, but build something cool enough that if they get a job offer from Goldman and from Facebook, the one from Hebert Grain Ventures is side by side with it. Will they pick it? Maybe not, but that's our goal. So, I mean, I have a real long-term vision compared to public companies that every 90 days have to hit the stock market goals. And I think that creates sustainability. It's in the best interest of me to take the best care of my land, produce the highest quality food, and have really high transparency on my data, not only for my farm, but for the consumer. We want the same thing. We just haven't told the story. I also want consumers to know that I'm not in a plaid shirt and have wheat in my mouth. Don't get me wrong. Some farms still do, and that's fine. But I also want the consumer to understand, don't shame me that I'm a corporate farm. Yeah, it's in a company because it's good for taxes. I got 5 people with the last name Hebert that are part of the company, and that's not including my kids. But I also had a team party the other day for anybody that works for me for more than 150 hours a year, because key part-time people are still part of the plan. We had 71 guests, including spouses and kids. We had 27 kids under the age of 9 that all go to the local schools. So call that a corporate farm if you want. I'm proud of what we do for our community, what we do for the industry. And I got no problem sitting down with the consumer to explain the math behind what nutrients a bushel of wheat or a bushel of canola requires. And that if I don't replenish that, or that some of their theories aren't going to allow me to be as sustainable as possible, they're actually going to create it to go backwards. I'll have that conversation. We just need to find the proper way to tell the story. And then, as I said, some of the media has found a good way to shame us for increasing in acres, when I think we need to be proud of it. It's how business changes. We're a small business, no different than, the mom and pop 7-Eleven on the corner, or the shoe store down the street. And we have to grow to be sustainable long term.
Well, you're growing. You're growing through innovation. You're also growing through your ability to identify opportunity and then capitalize on it. How much room for growth do you believe there still is in farming as a business?
Personally, I think agriculture is the oldest industry in the world that has the most opportunities in front of it. So the reason I say that is it's slow to change. It's changed immensely, don't get me wrong, but it's slow to change compared to a lot of industries. I think there are enormous amounts of concepts that are already being applied in other industries that we can apply to agriculture to really unhandcuff a lot of the areas. I think there's better stories to be told so that consumers and growers are on the same page. No different than, I mean, one of my goals is, I'd like you to be able to drink a beer one day in BC and snap a picture of the Q code, and it shows my 6 and 8 year old running through my barley crop. It shows the exact nutrient package that crop was given, the date it was harvested, how it flowed through to the maltster and ended up in your beer, and a tag back to our website to send questions to. I mean, that's the story that we need to tell, which will increase opportunities. I think the other thing is I mean, the average age of our industry is 58, 59 years old. So, I mean, that in itself is a huge opportunity in how the younger generation finds a way to take over this land, allow this group of people to still fulfill their legacy of being in agriculture and being proud of what they've done, through semi-retirement plans and taking care of the land and learning from them. It, I mean, we haven't even got into what technology in San Francisco and Guelph are coming up with when it comes to sensory tech and data. But I still think the first two are almost the most important part because that's what allows you to go down the path of the technology.
Wow, I know. The whole sensory data gathering aspect of farming is going to make significant changes in your ability to make appropriate and informed decisions.
It's funny. So I shouldn't even be talking about it. My management team would be mad because we haven't released it yet. But next week we're going to release a new idea called the Heber Grain Venture Landlord Guarantee. So I started thinking about if I was a retiring farmer, what would I want, right? And I'd want to know my land is going to be taken care of because I might leave it to my kids to either rent out or farm, or it's one of my major investments for my retirement. So we're going to get to the point that with our data and technology, they're going to get a semi-annual report of our crop plan, exactly what was put in there for nutrients, exactly what was removed, the weather, and it'll be time stamped right off of our equipment. Then we're going to do an opening soil test. So a soil test is how you tell the health. And every year we're going to give them a report card showing that we've either maintained their land or made it better. And at the end of the 4-year contract, if we haven't, if it's went backwards, I'm going to back pay them 10% of what I agreed to for the rental. In other words, I want to be exactly on the same page as you for land health because that's what we both want out of this. Am I going to pay top dollar in the area? No. I think that's unreasonable competition that isn't sustainable. However, I want to be really fair. I want your land to be an improved asset. I want the math on the nutrients to be correct because that's best for me, it's best for the landlord, and it's best for the consumer. And let's be transparent. I'll show you the data. Show your friends, show the consumer, show whoever you feel it would be good information to, but we'll guarantee it. We'll put our money where our mouth is. We're not just going to tell you that we're going to do a good job of sustainability. We're going to show you.
That is innovative thinking. It's being able to look at the current landscape and say, if we just readjust the pieces a little bit, we can wind up with a much better outcome for everyone. It's an extraordinary business, isn't it?
I always joke that those that are super passionate about business are actually addicted to the game, right? They're not addicted to acres. They're not addicted to money. They're addicted to the game. And I mean, I grew up playing hockey, and I mean, my best memories, sure, it's about some championships we won or some games we lost. But the real fun part was understanding the game better and being part of those teams that really found a way to mold and come together to make something special, right? And,
Yeah.
to me, that's the best part. And agriculture's got a unique thing for that because we have teams. We're tied to the land, which really they don't make any more land. It's one of the best assets on earth to try and improve, and our world requires it. And three, there's just so much opportunity coming down the pipeline that it's hard not to be addicted to the game.
So it's hard not to be wrapped up in your enthusiasm for farming. So, kind of on a closing note, uh, to the consumer, when we find farmers who are passionate as you are, what's the benefit to them? They might be going, well, that's really nice, Christian, that your business is running well. What about my food? How does this help me have a better diet?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple things I'd urge. The first one would be there are bad eggs in every industry. So don't get me wrong, no different than every industry you deal with as a consumer. There is 1 or 2% that's not doing a good job. But don't paint the brush over the whole industry for that. And we as a farmer need to do the exact same thing back. For a consumer that's super loud with bad logic or not a belief in science, we have to understand that's not every consumer, and we need to make sure that those conversations are respectful and logical. Secondly, I would say the ability for the data to be transparent on what we're doing is increasing every single day. And as a farmer, I don't want to hide from the consumer what we're doing from a nutrient standpoint in order to grow the bushels we are, in order to feed a growing population. To the point that my kids can grab a handful of every grain we grow after harvest and put it directly in their mouth, and it does not bother me. In fact, it's something we're happy about. And if I'm okay with my kids doing that, and it's a business I want my kids to come back to, you need to understand that my long-term beliefs on sustainability are completely in line with yours. Now, over the next 60 years, am I going to change how I've done things because I've come up, there's been new data or new science or new logic to show we could do a better job? Absolutely, I am. That's how good business works. But it doesn't mean that what I'm doing right now isn't the best way I know to be sustainable from a financial standpoint, from a land standpoint, from a healthy, food product for the consumer standpoint, and for the whole industry. And yeah, we're going to change. We're going to try and get better. Absolutely. And we encourage constructive dialogue on possible ways to get better, but let's make sure it's constructive both ways, not just with a one-sided, Google search on the bad parts of farming or the good parts of farming. I think it's a win-win for everybody if we get into those types of dialogues.
It's an extraordinary business, and your perspective and the way that you run it really does help to ensure that there is sustainability moving forward, and that's what we need. We didn't even get to touch on really the environment, other than the fact that farmers, of course, are invested in their property. Hopefully, I can have you come back another time, and we can have a conversation about agriculture's role in helping to preserve environment and play a vitally beneficial role in climate.
Yeah, I think it'd be exciting, and it's always good to share knowledge and hear the other side of the story from everybody too. So I find it
Yeah.
exciting.